Here's what actually unfolded over the past 48 hours. A development that took Washington completely by surprise, that slipped past nearly every major international media forecast, and that even the most attentive observers of this long running trade conflict never expected to see at this stage. Trump has capitulated. I am choosing that word very carefully, not as exaggeration or dramatic language, but as an accurate description of what has taken place. What it signifies is that the central position the Trump administration defended for months, the belief that Canada would eventually break under sustained American economic pressure, that the strain would become unbearable, and that Prime Minister Mark Carney would ultimately come to the table on Washington's terms, has now been entirely abandoned. This reversal did not happen quietly or subtly. It was not the result of a carefully managed diplomatic sequence designed to let both sides save face. It was not wrapped in vague language or a joint statement that allowed Washington to claim partial success. Instead, it is plainly visible. It is reflected in official actions, in public positioning, and in the record itself. What makes this moment particularly significant, and what will shape how historians interpret it, is the fact that Carney never asked for it. He never demanded it. He never negotiated for it directly. Rather, he built alternative economic pathways, held Canada's position without compromise, rejected every form of pressure, and simply waited. And despite that restraint, the capitulation still came. That is what real leverage looks like. It emerges when a country has the discipline to endure pressure, the clarity to maintain its position, and the patience to allow underlying realities to force the other side to retreat. It reflects an understanding that absorbing short-term economic pain is not weakness, but a strategic tool. To fully understand what has happened, it is important to examine in clear terms what this capitulation actually involves. Much of the mainstream American media coverage has downplayed both its scale and its implications. Across three major fronts, the Trump administration has stepped back from positions it had strongly promoted since the beginning of this dispute. First, on tariffs. Without making a direct public announcement, but through market signals, indirect messaging, and quiet back-channel communication, Washington has indicated that the current tariff regime on Canada is no longer sustainable. Preparations are now underway for a significant rollback. This is not a minor adjustment or conditional easing, as previously suggested. It represents a meaningful shift, one that brings the structure closer to the legal framework established under the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, known as CUSMA or USMCA. Second, on legal actions. The Section 301 investigations into alleged unfair trade practices, widely criticized as lacking solid legal grounding, are being quietly set aside. What was expected to become a lengthy and resource-intensive process, likely ending in a negative ruling at the World Trade Organization, is now being abandoned before reaching that stage. Third, and perhaps most importantly, the narrative itself is changing. The long-standing portrayal of Canada as a trade violator, a message repeatedly used to justify the policy domestically, is being gradually removed from official rhetoric. This shift is subtle, but it is significant. These are not minor adjustments. They represent the dismantling of the three core pillars of the administration's strategy: the justification, the enforcement mechanism, and the political messaging. All are being withdrawn simultaneously, and done so quietly without a major announcement that would require explanation. The most important question is why Carney never needed to ask for any of this. Traditionally, trade conflicts end through negotiation. One side applies pressure, the other responds, and eventually both reach a compromise. Carney chose a different path. Instead of negotiating under pressure, he focused on increasing the long-term cost of the conflict for the United States to a level that made continuation unsustainable. He reduced Canada's dependence on the U.S. relationship. He rejected every pressure tactic. He ensured that the economic costs were visible and clearly linked to policy decisions in Washington. American businesses, consumers, and political figures were made fully aware of the impact. And then he waited. The outcome was not forced through negotiation. It emerged because the situation itself became untenable for the United States. The mechanisms behind this shift are clear. The first was financial pressure. U.S. markets began reflecting the real costs of the trade war. Supply chains were disrupted. Lumber prices increased, raising construction costs. energy prices rose in key regions. These effects were visible, measurable, and directly tied to policy decisions. Businesses responded through lobbying, public statements, and direct communication with political leaders. The message was consistent. The trade war was causing real damage and needed to end. The second mechanism was political pressure within the Republican Party. Leaders from key states such as Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Montana began signaling concern. These signals were often subtle but unmistakable. Meetings with Canadian officials, legislative language promoting resolution, and public emphasis on supply chain integration all pointed in the same direction. Over time, this internal pressure grew. It was not loud or confrontational, but it was persistent. And it created exactly the conditions Carney's strategy relied on. It is important to distinguish between capitulation and resolution. Capitulation means abandoning a position. Resolution means building a new stable framework. The first has happened, the second has not yet been achieved. From Canada's perspective, the requirements for resolution remain clear. Removal of tariffs that violate CUSMA, withdrawal of legally weak investigations, and acknowledgement of the issues. From Trump's perspective, any resolution must still allow him to present a narrative of success. Bridging that gap will be the challenge moving forward. Returning to the previous framework is straightforward in substance but politically complex in presentation. What is already clear is that the balance of leverage has shifted. Canada is no longer negotiating from weakness. It has demonstrated resilience, patience, and the ability to absorb pressure. The implications extend beyond this dispute. Governments around the world are watching closely. The lesson they are taking is that American economic pressure, while powerful, is not unbeatable. With preparation, discipline, and patience, it can be resisted. This realization will influence future global responses to similar situations. Canada's approach was not just a tactical success, it demonstrated a model of resistance, a model that other nations can study and adapt. For Canadians, this represents a significant achievement. A strategy was developed, executed with consistency, and delivered results without direct confrontation. For Americans, it is a moment for reflection. A conflict was initiated without a clear path to victory, based on assumptions that did not hold, and it has ended in a way that weakens credibility and leverage. The costs of that miscalculation will continue to be felt. As July 2026 approaches, the outcome is already clear. Mark Carney secured the critical victory. What remained was simply allowing events to unfold as expected.